Hi, this is Diana. It's been a while since I made a video, pretty much almost about a year, because when I did make a video at the time, I was being harassed and teased quite a bit, actually. And some of it was actually due to a culture of ignorance. The reason why I say that is because it goes back to an article that I read from one professor at a university that I graduated from, UW Parkside, as an undergraduate. What he wrote about was, at the time that that he taught at Parkside, and at the time that many people went, Parkside was really one of the only open universities in Wisconsin. In fact, it's very open. There's no SAT, no ACT. Basic qualification was just to graduate from high school, no class rank. For many people, they took advantage of that, and they realized that that was a benefit. But there are some basically who didn't, who just basically just sort of really just felt that it was they really just wanted to go and just sort of be like just be disruptive. Many of us who are in pre-professional programs actually were glad to have the opportunity, because Parkside offered an alternative which was better than Madison, in that as a pre-professional in science and computer science, you actually had the opportunity to use lab equipment, do experiments that you really couldn't do unless you were a graduate. And even in computer science, it was nice to be able to work on assignments without having to work at 2 in the morning to get computer time, because graduate students hogged up all the computer time, which was common back then at Madison. However, during that time, though, Parkside had another feature. It was open. It wasn't a case of. It was more like don't ask, don't tell. You could be LGBT as long as you didn't tell, and people sort of understood not to ask. But it still took a while for many people to transition, especially me, because during my undergraduate years, people would wonder, well, why are you so shy? Why are you so standoffish? Well, part of the reason was because basically it was always the case, well, would someone come out and say, well, basically, is someone going to try to shame me, try to humiliate me? Finally, what happened, a few professors really understood. Professor Grossberg, Professor Goodman, Professor Eisenberg, Professor Holmes, Beecham Robinson, who was my communications professor, and even some computer science professors eventually understood too, which is Professor Grossberg but the thing is, what happened though, it still was the time though that I really, it took a while to begin to transition, because an issue that existed, that sometimes may exist in some parts of the country, was actually employment discrimination. Although Wisconsin passed a law in 1982 banning LGBT discrimination, it wasn't enforced. It was only enforced in Dade County, which is where UW-Madison was. It wasn't enforced in Milwaukee County, which is the second most populous county in Wisconsin. Illinois had a transgender protection law, but what that meant though is basically it still didn't guard you against going through a harassment while traveling through certain parts of the city. For example, if someone were to travel south of the Sears Tower and you're transgendered, it still could become very dicey. So it's basically it was a patchwork quilt of things. But the most important thing that I was happy to see about with the video 10 Celebrities Who Are Transgender, though, is that they did mention about some of the things that they went through and what they went through as far as overcoming them. Because the hardest thing is some people will try to basically force their views, or or even some social groups will try to force their views on converting people, doing what they call gay conversion, which was mentioned in the movie, or even non-transgender conversion. The reason why I mention this because sometimes what people really don't understand is when some people transition, depending on where you are in the country, it can be very hard sometimes to find an apartment because you'll run into a lot of people who will make a lot of excuses as to why they pick someone else or something. But the person is then still either stuck in a shelter or if the shelter figures that they can't convert them to their particular faith or church or whatever, the person could end up living out in the street somewhere or basically staying long nights at a restaurant that's open 24 hours a day, and then basically going someplace to try to sleep for a few hours and also just try to maintain as much of a normal activity as possible. And some people say, well, I didn't realize you were homeless, and they did, but really they're afraid to act. And it doesn't matter which political party it is. When I ran through a tough period in 2017, the interesting thing was the people who really stood by me at that very low point. It wasn't one party or another. It's actually due to the person. But for example, when I needed a ride, a friend of mine who's a Republican. However, and she's also evangelical, but the thing is, she believes that she served in the Navy and also agrees that the United States doesn't have an established church religion, that church and state should be separate. So even though she has her faith, she realizes it is important to help someone out, and also to help someone basically who did participate in the first Gulf War. As a civilian contractor. However, the problem is with some people on the other end, basically, who claim that they are a Democrat. Some of them actually would see me walk 5 miles to one place because in Kenosha there was very little public transportation, especially on the weekends. And they say, oh, we saw you walking. Well, they didn't realize it's a hot day and there's the only way I could get to someplace, but they would never stop by and help. So that's the reason why, even though I am a member of a certain church, I'm living in West Racine now. The thing is, what I do in West Racine, I've made new friends and eliminated the contacts, eliminated the negative people and the in between that I knew in Kenosha, because for many people who are transgendered, the thing is, you're happier when you can live the way you want to live, just the way you want to do, because that was the other point that I don't know if other videos will mention this, but another thing that comes up in videos in being transgender too is when someone goes through social service or someone goes through a shelter, the biggest fear what games the shelter players, if they see someone who's basically male to female transgender and is rebelling, the first stunt they'll do is they'll say, oh, let's put her on the man's side, or they'll use the word him. They'll use the pronoun him deliberately to misidentify people, but they'll try to do the thing about trying to put someone who's transgender on the men's side as a way of intimidation, because basically in a shelter it's a wide group of people, wide group of education, wide group of beliefs, and it is basically cherry picking, because those who sing the loudest in the choir and pray the best for dinner get the fastest service, but also those there are goons there too that try to intimidate. And the issue is when certain government officials try to send testers, the testers are sought out right away, and the people who are doing the abusing in social service or shelter can see who those testers are, and they know how to dupe them. That's why basically there has to be independent testers that basically can actually mix in so they're not spotted right away, so they can do something. However, the point I'm trying to make though is in whenever someone who's transgender has to go through social service or church or any type of church, we are very leery because it's because basically it's not that some of us are not spiritual, some of us don't believe in faith. My mother taught religious education. She was a teacher. My dad was a deacon, as well as an executive. My sister actually has a religious degree for religious education, and I was originally raised First Congregationalist. My dad was Catholic and gave up his faith to marry my mother because my mother and my father agreed ahead of time that they wanted us to not have to have that conflict as to which is which. So that's why my dad converted over to my mother's faith. However, part of the thing was also that we are a creative family, an engineering family, scientific family. We wanted to keep creative, not to be held back by fear, not to be held back by intimidation of someone co-opting something like the way in the movie Paper Moon, where you have people who know the Bible chapter and verse that use it to con people. And when people who are transgender go through shelter, you run into an awful lot of those people, quite a bit. And it's not the people who are staying there, it's actually some of the people who work as managers, some of the people who work there as night staff. And always, whenever someone complains, that always what the complaint is, well, we're sorry, we didn't watch them close enough. After you hear that so many times, you realize that's not really, they really don't care. They really expect that to happen. So that's why it's good that these videos that are made on what happens on celebrities who are transgender and have transitioned are important. Even like what Lady Gaga about the art of fame, because sometimes you have to even break away from what your old past is. There are many of us who have 2 Facebook accounts, and part of the reason for that is because, well, just to give an example with me though, when I first had Facebook, I was glad to have Facebook. I would share everything, put everything on there, put pictures, everything else. The issue that came up though is I also would add friends, sometimes people who I just expressed an interest. Hey, I want to be your friend, and I just thought, well, basically, it's sort of like the area of southeast Wisconsin where I grew up in the western suburbs of Milwaukee. You really didn't have to be on guard. I mean, and what happens in those days, it wasn't a case of where you tested, where people took advantage of people because they're gullible. It's just basically still, we could still do certain things. We could, it was common for us basically to basically, even when I was growing up, forced to play football late at night on a lighted field till 10 o'clock at night, bring out a boombox, listen to American Top 40 on Sundays when we were playing football, or sometimes baseball. We had 2 baseball fields behind one area where we used to play. One of them we named Wrigley Field, one of them was County Stadium. In the football season was Lambeau Field and Soldier Field. But that time, basically in the 70s and 80s, people were didn't have to worry about basically some of the internet stalking, internet predators. But what happened though on Facebook, eventually I started adding friends, and at one point it became very hard because I noticed that some of the people I added were really not friends at all, but they were social stalkers. And the reason I found out about this because when I used to go out more, sometimes I'd go out to certain fast food places to have a snack or someplace else, and I'd hear people, talk negatively about a post I put on Facebook, and then I'd face other teasing as I was waiting for a bus, and that's how I knew basically that that social predators had some of them had gained too much access to my one account. I couldn't figure out who they all were, so my solution was to start up a second Facebook account. And the second Facebook account, I didn't invite anyone over from my previous Facebook account. I did a little bit later some that I actually knew from UW Parkside that I actually met. But as far as people just applying online, I was very cautious. And also on my second Facebook account, I was very cautious about who I let as friends. Part of the rule was it probably will sound sexist, but basically no guys, because there are also a lot of transgender trawlers out there who will try to cause issues too. So basically, it was all women friends. Some of them in the creative arts. Some of them who have their own bands. Some of them who work in the music industry. Some of them who work fashion. But yet, it was again basically sort of someone who I would take more attention to. But going back to different communities, though, the community I live in now, part of the reason why I'm happier because an issue that I ran into in 2017 when I lived in Kenosha was at one point. Kenosha is a very progressive community. It has multiple libraries. The North Side Library, South Side Library, excellent. And there are many people who I know there, and many of them who've known me since I was raised in Kenosha from about age 12. The issue is though, some of the newcomers that came, it was some people who really were trying to do the gay conversion, the transphobia, everything else, and part of it was even like even forcing complete chastity. Saying, well, if you're going to be transgender, you have to follow complete chastity. You can have friendships, but you can't have any holding, any kissing, any touching, and in schools that they wouldn't even follow themselves. And that's part of the issue why many people who are transgender have issues with church, because it still comes back to what my dad mentioned to me about the first two rules when he worked with a major general who graduated from West Point, was that and how one lives their life, or basically practice, or at work or whatever. The first two things are any example you want others to follow, you follow yourself. And if you're going to give an order, you have to be able to follow that order yourself. So when people try to do these transphobic or gay conversions, or even suggesting complete chastity, that's a violation of both those rules, because it's rules that they wouldn't follow themselves, but they're signing a hero because they're trying to make off that that their way is better. And it's in the United States and in other parts of the world, no one has a right to tell anyone how to live, and especially how they practice, what faith they practice, or who they love. That's why I'm glad of the Supreme Court nomination. 2016 decision. Yet, a problem that still exists though, and this is where some people get mad at me on both political parties, is I do speak out. I do have a radio show that I do at Parkside, Ideas with Diana, on Mondays 1 to 2 p.m. It's a talk show. I try not to do it as a political talk. However, but the thing is, I've learned from my experience in transitioning, as was mentioned, that that people don't realize sometimes just how much hardship some groups do put upon people to transition, and how stressful it can be. And that's part of the reason why I don't go by labels on political party. If a candidate says, well, if they're Democrat, or a candidate says they're Republican, well, if a candidate says they're a Democrat and they don't accept who I am, I'm not going to vote for them. If a candidate is a Republican and they accept who I am, yes, I will. It part of it is having someone that does have your back, because that's very important. Even with friends that I know that served in the military, all of them knew me before I transitioned. All of them have my back. Some of them served during the Vietnam era. The reason I say Vietnam era because it was the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. That's how some friends actually refer to it. Others I know from who I worked with during the first Gulf War when I worked as a medical researcher and civilian contractor. And that. So, but the thing is, it is when you vote for someone. Or even like when I go to church, like what some churches will say, well, oh, we're very liberal, but the way I can tell those, how do they treat me if I come in pants, or how do they treat me if I come to a casual function in leggings? How do they treat me if I come to a casual function in dress or a skirt? If I see differences on how they treat me based on what I'm wearing, then I know no, they're not. They say that again, it's a label. And it's not really true. So, however, like in West Racine, two churches that I attend once in a while. I met some people there, and I also had them as add on Facebook is Mount Pleasant Lutheran Church. It's known as the Spaceship Church. The actual website is spaceshipchurch.org because it's designed. It looks like a spaceship because of. For acoustics. The person who designed the church was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, and it's actually right on Wright Avenue where I live. And now the churches are one on 16th and in Quincy, which is Living Faith Lutheran Church. And part of the reason why I stopped there a little bit is because basically. There are times that basically when people are still recovering from a bad experience, they need a food pantry. And at their food pantry, I've met a lot of people. I haven't run into any teasing. I actually had one person I had a very great discussion with. And the thing is, though, so the thing is, what happens. You can't, one shouldn't really use a single label to make a thing, because, like for me, I'm socially liberal, but the thing is, I'm also a moderate because I really don't want the government dictating every single aspect of what we do. Like for example, the government shouldn't dictate us basically as to what church someone should do or what type of church practice someone should do. Even though one candidate may argue religious freedom in the United States is that the Second Amendment allows anyone to practice any faith they wish or not. However, it doesn't allow them to force their beliefs on anyone at work or through working as a professional or through social service. So it's a limited right. It's not an absolute right. And in addition, the Second Amendment still makes the Constitution the law of the land, not a church council, like in The Handmaid's Tale. So, but some people say, well, saying all that, why are you about? Because part of the thing is, I also believe in the right of the individual to create something, to try to make their own business, to help their community. And not to always have to rely on having to go through different types of lobbyists, different types of PR people to get something done. Because my mother's family owned a road construction business and made many highways through Wisconsin and Illinois. My dad's family, we owned an apartment business, which we were in business for 85 years, and it was owner-occupied. Everyone who rented to us always was able to move forward and get a home. The thing is, when we did rent, we also had an open policy like Parkside did. We accepted everyone who rented. However, the one basis that we stuck to was when they rented was, do you want to improve your life? Then if you do, we'll support you as long as you're making steps to improve your life. But if you're gonna slide backwards and try to use this to sort of pull other people backwards, then we won't. And that's why we sometimes people say, well, you're not right. You should rent to these people instead. Well, the thing is, the people we wanted to improve, they made an effort to improve, and we also stood with them when they had difficulties in that. Some people say that basically that at the time when I ran the building, that I was too easy of a landlord. Well, I'd rather be too easy of a landlord than very vicious, because anyone that rented for us, we never made them homeless. But there have been a lot of landlords that have done that. And this is something where in the transgender community, LGBT community, we need to address as well, because there are many excuses as to how people can cover it up. The most important point, though, is to have meetings where people can keep their spirit up and do things. Like for me, where I'm living now, during part of my career, after my father died, I worked as part of the UCFW, and I worked in a grocery store at the front end. And one grocery store that I go to, everyone actually who I worked with before I transitioned, and they see me now, it's like, well, we're glad to see you. And they're very happy, because basically at that time I still was extremely shy. I would be very hard to talk with anyone, even very hard to go on YouTube, as well as going on a weekly radio show. So I mean, if people and some people who are transformed say, well, if you hadn't transitioned, you wouldn't have gone through this homelessness, you wouldn't have gone through this hardship. Well, thing is, maybe not, but the thing is, I would have gone through something even worse, being hidden, feeling alone, almost to the point of basically being completely locked up in a shell. And no one wants to live that type of life. That's why it's important to be yourself, move forward. In closing, you'll see some posters behind me. These are some of the posters I made for some software that I sell. And the one thing on my left shoulder is what you'll see. You'll see something looks like a sort of like a board, and that's actually my dad's old computer board from a wired program computer, because prior to the late 60s, in the early 60s, many computers were actually wired program where you actually wired it, and that board actually would still work in a computer, but that was one of his best programs that he wrote. And it's actually, and the reason why it's wrapped in saran wrap is to help preserve it, because that board is 45 years old in that. So and I keep that as remembrance of my dad. And the thing is, it's important. Move forward. Dress the way you want to dress. And if you want to dress over the top, dress over the top, because that's another thing that some groups will try to do, is they'll try to convince people, oh, well, we'll accept you if you don't dress over the top, or you dress dowdy, or you dress like basically like the way some people who are transgendered, who are still under control, basically just in safe outfits. Well, dress what you want to wear. You don't have to dress to please someone else. Please yourself. It's important to please yourself, because if you don't please yourself, you're hurting yourself. And the reason why many of us do transitions, because we want to live a better life. We're tired of trying to hide. Tired of the anguish. We're tired of trying to fit in and have people, one woman say gotcha, and try to get you laid off or something else. Be yourself. You actually will go further and move further. And even like before my dad died, he realized it because we talked about this. And he warned me about what would happen when I did transition, because he said, well, there's going to be some parts of the country that you can't live because when you transition, it's still not going to be up to speed. And that's true. But what happened was he supported me fully in everything I did, as well as my mother and my sister. The issue is, though, it's just we still have a long ways to go. And the other thing is we also need to get people from the LGBT community, transgender community, out to the schools to talk on Career Day, to talk about their careers. What do they do? Because there are many types of relationships where it could be basically a couple that has a child, but basically the child is a biological child of the mother, but not of the partner, and that's common worldwide. But we also have to get out to break down some of the fear and hysteria that happens, though, because in the United States, only 30% of the people have a college degree. And in some parts, even Wisconsin, there's a culture of ignorance where people actually brag about having a 4th grade education and being able to work to a manager with a 4th grade education, and that's due to the old industrial shops that existed in this area. However, as far as attitudes go, they're not very accepting towards anyone that's not like them. That's why we need to reach out, and we need to make sure that we all live with each other and embrace our differences, and realize that just because you see someone who's transgender or someone who's LGBT, it's not a virus. It's not a lifestyle. It's a conscious choice we all make, and we've all been through the ramifications. I mean, some of the YouTube videos are just starting to discuss this, but it's however, going through the ramifications is far better in the aftermath as to being able to live fully in that, because I would not ever want to go back to living in hiding, in isolation, in anguish, and that never again. Because even when I first transitioned, my mother said, "Well, I'm glad to see your natural personalities come out, because before I transitioned, there'd be moments when my personality wouldn't come out. It would just be momentary glimpses." And my mother's glad said, "Well, I'm glad to see that you're not trying to hide behind coding. You're not doing extra coding of programs to try to hide your anguish. You're actually meeting people. You're actually getting involved in activities." And that's what everyone should do: is live your life fully. However, living your life fully doesn't mean intimidating people or forcing your views on people. I realize people have different views on spirituality and religion, and what happens? They're different churches and different faiths. That's fine. I mean, but the thing is, we can still coexist. We can still work together. We can still make a better community. And because part of it is, basically, we do share a belief in freedom, a belief in an individual, a belief in a positive future, and keep looking forward. Well, let me know what you think. My Twitter site is Ideas with Diana, Ideas with an S, and also another Twitter site I have is Diana1A. In addition, I have a weekly radio show that I do at UW Parkside on Mondays from 1 to 2 p.m. Central. And in closing, this summer, I actually worked with the Racine Raiders, a semi-pro football team in the Mid-States Football League, as a communications intern, doing a few interviews, mostly doing studio engineering and production work for the Saturday games. When they were at Horwick Field, and I was at the studio at Parkside, setting up and doing the controls for the underlighting, because Parkside Station is a non-profit station, so we don't have advertising. And it's a great experience. The nice thing I do like about the Raiders, though, is very open-minded, very good team. In the Mid-States Football League, it's interesting. One team the Raiders played, I believe it was the Lockton Rush. They actually had a young woman who was a field goal kicker on the team. So if you can imagine that. But the biggest goals with the Raiders, though, is they do have actually full medical personnel. So it's actually one of the better run teams in the area. But it does show that, even in football, football's starting to transition to realize that it's being transphobic, being homophobic, that's not cool anymore, because there have been many professional players who've come out in the NBA and NFL. So just something to think about. Well, I'll end it for now and put up another video in a little bit. Let me know what you think.